Welcome to the War Archive, where wars become stories.
At first light on the Kosovo plain, the mist settles over a silent field. So quiet, it's hard to imagine that only hours earlier, tens of thousands fought and died here. Scattered among the debris of battle are clues that refuse to agree with one another. A shattered spear near the Ottoman tents, a trail of hooves leading nowhere, and at the center of it all, two rulers, both dead, though no one can say with certainty how. Witnesses spoke in contradictions. Some swore a single Serbian knight vanished into the dust and reappeared near the Sultan's camp. Others claimed Murad fell long after the fighting had ended. And in distant courts, letters raced across Europe telling stories that didn't match the ones born on the battlefield. Even today, no chronicler can fully explain how a prince and a sultan met their ends within the same day, on the same ground, under circumstances so murky that history still struggles to separate truth from legend. But this mystery did not appear out of nowhere. Kosovo was not a sudden tragedy. It was the final thread in a long weave of ambition, shifting loyalties, and slow-burning tension that engulfed the Balkans. To uncover what truly happened here, we must begin long before the dust rose on this field, and follow the path that led two nations into a story the world still cannot agree upon. The collapse of the Serbian Empire did not arrive with a single blow. It came like a slow, suffocating dusk, each hour darker than the last. After the disastrous defeat at Maritsa in 1371, the once mighty realm of the Nemanjić dynasty began to fracture from within. Vukašin Mrnjavčević and his brother Uglješa lay dead on the battlefield, their army scattered, their authority erased in a single night. Only months later, Emperor Uroš V, known to his people as the Weak, died without an heir, and the throne that had once commanded the Balkans simply fell silent. Across the land, former imperial provinces found themselves unmoored, drifting into the hands of regional lords who carved territories for themselves out of the fading empire. Castles that once flew the double-headed eagle now bore the banners of petty rulers competing for influence, wealth, and survival. The great roads that once carried imperial tax caravans now echoed with the uncertainty of fractured dominions. What had been a unified state for more than 2 centuries dissolved into a patchwork of ambitions and fears. In this vacuum, Christian domains in the Balkans stood exposed. Without a central power to rally them, none possessed the strength to withstand the rising Ottoman tide pushing steadily from the southeast. Villagers whispered of advancing Turkish raiders, of cities bending under new rulers, of a future clouded with uncertainty. Yet Sultan Murad I did not rush to claim these broken lands, not out of mercy, but out of deliberate, measured calculation. He knew that conquering fragmented states by force risked forging them into a unified resistance, so he chose a quieter path, one that relied on diplomacy as much as the sword. Murad extended offers of vassalship to Christian nobles, beginning with the Dejanović family of Eastern Macedonia. Tribute was exchanged for peace, submission for security. It was a subtle strategy, and a devastatingly effective one. What the battlefield had shattered, Murad sought to bind under his influence with promises rather than chains. A similar approach unfolded in Bulgaria, and even in the fading shell of Byzantium, whose emperors clung to Constantinople's walls like the last remnants of a dying world. Further west, Prince Marko, heir to Vukašin, did not immediately submit to Ottoman authority. Proud and independent, he clung to the territories his family still controlled. Yet pride alone could not replenish fallen warriors or secure borders vulnerable to rival Serbian lords. In the aftermath of Maritsa, Marko's position weakened so rapidly that resistance became an impossibility. To remain in power, he too eventually recognized Ottoman suzerainty, a reluctant concession that symbolized how deeply the empire's collapse had reshaped the political map. Thus, almost without open war, Murad expanded his sphere of influence across the fractured Balkans. Tribute payments filled his treasury, manpower gathered under his banners, and new strongholds rose along the frontier, silent fortresses built to anchor Ottoman expansion further into Europe. The Balkans remained outwardly peaceful, but beneath that stillness, the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. A new force was rising, and the world that Serbian nobles once knew was slipping away, like fading embers in the wind. Sultan Murad I understood something that many of his rivals did not. Empires are not always built through conquest alone. In the fragile landscape of the late 14th century Balkans, violence could unite the fractured Christian lords against him, but a hand extended in controlled tolerance could divide them more effectively than any army. And so, while the world expected the Sultan to press his advantage with fire and sword, Murad chose a quieter, more deliberate path. He turned first to the nobles nearest his expanding frontier, offering peace in exchange for vassalage. To Christian lords who had watched the Serbian Empire crumble and feared both their neighbors and their future, the Ottoman proposal carried a dangerous allure: protection without immediate occupation, tribute instead of devastation. The Hrebeljanović family became one of the earliest to accept this delicate arrangement. Their lands remained nominally their own, yet their autonomy now flowed through the will of the Sultan. Bulgaria, weakened and divided, found itself facing the same reality. Ottoman raids, swift, probing, relentless, made clear that resistance would bring ruin faster than diplomacy could offer respite. Under growing pressure, Bulgarian rulers accepted vassalage as well, a reluctant act born from necessity rather than loyalty. Byzantium, too, once a titan among empires, was reduced to a flicker of its former self, able to defend little beyond the walls of Constantinople. Even they, proud heirs of Rome, entered the Ottoman orbit through tribute and uneasy agreements. Further west, Prince Marko hesitated to kneel. The son of Vukašin still held a fragment of his father's lands and clung to the legacy of a Serbian nobility that had once stretched across mountains and plains. But pride could not restore the soldiers he lost at Maritsa, nor could it stabilize a realm surrounded by ambitious neighbors, ready to divide it the moment his defenses faltered. Isolated and outmatched, Marko eventually bowed to the inevitable and recognized Murad's authority. It was a concession that symbolized the shifting of an era, heroes of the past bending beneath the weight of a rising power. For Murad, vassalship was not merely submission, it was investment. The tribute paid by these Christian lords financed fresh campaigns and fortified strongholds deep in the Balkans. These outposts became stepping stones for Ottoman influence, projecting power farther west each year. Muslim settlers, soldiers, and administrators followed, seeding new communities where imperial authority could take root. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the frontier moved, not in a single sweeping conquest, but in the quiet absorption of lands whose rulers could no longer stand alone. The Balkans were experiencing a transformation not marked by cataclysm, but by a slow and tightening grip. What began as diplomacy soon became dependence, and dependence slid into subordination. By avoiding a grand war, Murad achieved something far more enduring. He created a political lattice that bound the Christian lords to him, even as they still nominally ruled their lands. The peace he built was not the absence of conflict, but a scaffold for the empire he intended to expand. Yet while this carefully orchestrated quiet spread across much of the region, one man was rising who would not bend so easily. In the heartland of the former Serbian Empire, a new noble was gathering strength, consolidating domains, and nurturing ambitions that might one day challenge the Ottoman advance. His name was Lazar. From the ruins of the collapsing Serbian Empire, a single figure began to emerge, quietly at first, then with growing authority. Prince Lazar Hrebeljanović was not born into the old imperial dynasty, nor did he inherit vast lands like the great lords who preceded him. Yet in a time when the Balkans were breaking apart, it was precisely his blend of caution, resolve, and political instinct that allowed him to rise where stronger men had fallen. The void left by Maritsa had not only destroyed armies, it had dismantled the fragile balance that once held Serbia together. Into this vacuum stepped Lazar. He moved carefully, consolidating Moravian Serbia, a region blessed with fertile soil, prosperous towns, and fortified monasteries that had survived the empire's collapse. Unlike other nobles who sought glory through war, Lazar understood that endurance, not ambition, was the key to rebuilding. He knit alliances through marriage, diplomacy, and calculated generosity, drawing smaller lords into his orbit without forcing their submission. In an age of fractured loyalties, stability itself became a form of power. But Lazar was not merely a caretaker of lost lands. He possessed a vision. He saw the disintegration of Serbia not as an end, but as an opportunity to restore dignity to a fractured people. Alongside his trusted ally and son-in-law Vuk Branković, Lazar reclaimed Skopje, once the capital of the old empire, from the weakening grip of Prince Marko. This was not simply territorial gain, it was a symbolic reclaiming of Serbian prestige. Towns fell under his banner not through reckless conquest, but through methodical consolidation of influence and resources. His power expanded further in 1373 when he joined forces with Ban Tvrtko of Bosnia and the Hungarian noble Nicholas Garai. Together, they targeted Nikola Altomanović, one of the last great Serbian magnates whose ambition threatened to destabilize the region even further. Outnumbered and surrounded, Altomanović was crushed, and his lands divided among the victors. This victory did more than expand Lazar's domain. It established him as the foremost Serbian lord of his generation, a stabilizing force in a land desperate for leadership. By the late 1370s, Lazar's authority stretched across a revitalized Moravian Serbia. He brought order to the mines of Novo Brdo, one of the richest silver deposits in the Balkans. He strengthened monasteries as centers of culture and political meaning. He re-established a court capable of attracting scholars, priests, and diplomats. And with each quiet victory, he laid another stone in the foundation of a state that might one day stand against the Ottoman advance. But Lazar was also a realist. He understood that no lord, no matter how capable, could single-handedly resurrect the Serbian Empire. Bosnia, under Tvrtko, was rising with its own ambitions, and the interests of Hungarian kings hovered like a shadow over the north. Even so, Lazar did what few others could. He became the center of gravity around which the remaining Serbian lands began to orbit, driven by his promise of unity at a moment when disunity meant extinction. Lazar's ascent marked the beginning of a new chapter in Balkan history, a final rally of Christian resistance before the Great Storm. His lands were modest compared to the vast Ottoman realm, but they were disciplined, fertile, and fiercely loyal. Yet even as Lazar fortified his realm and renewed Serbian pride, he knew the fragile peace could not hold forever. Forces far greater than any Serbian lord were already gathering beyond the mountains, and the time was coming when Lazar would be forced to choose between vassalage and war. While Lazar rose in the heartlands of the former Serbian Empire, another powerful figure was shaping events to the west. Ban Tvrtko of Bosnia, a ruler of sharp intellect and far-reaching ambition, watched the chaos after Maritsa with a clear understanding of what it meant. Where old empires fall, new crowns can be forged. Bosnia had long stood in the shadow of its neighbors, caught between Hungarian pressure and Serbian dominance. Now, with Serbia fractured, Tvrtko saw a rare opening to elevate his realm from borderland to kingdom. Tvrtko's authority grew steadily as he consolidated the Bosnian heartland and secured loyalties among powerful local magnates. His confidence was further strengthened in 1377 when he crowned himself King of the Serbs in Bosnia at the Miliševa monastery. The symbolism was unmistakable. Bosnia now claimed not just independence, but inheritance. By tying his title to the legacy of the Nemanjić dynasty, Tvrtko cast himself as a rightful successor to Serbian imperial tradition, an audacious move that revealed the scale of his ambition. Despite this bold claim, Tvrtko and Lazar remained allies rather than rivals, a testament to the hard pragmatism of the age. Both men understood that the Balkans were too fractured for Christian lords to squander strength on internal conflict. Mutual survival required cooperation, not competition. Their alliance was not born of trust, but of necessity, a unity forged in the shadow of Ottoman expansion, where each lord understood that resisting alone was a path to ruin. Their cooperation reached a critical moment with the downfall of Nikola Altomanović in 1373. Altomanović, one of the last great Serbian magnates, controlled vast territories and possessed the kind of ambition that threatened all who bordered him. To Lazar, he was a destabilizing force. To Tvrtko, a potential rival for Serbian legitimacy. To Hungary, a power that could disrupt their influence in the region. Thus, the unlikely triumvirate, Lazar, Tvrtko, and the Hungarian noble Nicholas Garai, formed a coalition dedicated to his destruction. The campaign unfolded swiftly. Outnumbered and encircled, Altomanović's forces crumbled, and his dominion was divided like spoils among the victors. For Lazar, The gain solidified his position as Serbia's most stable and powerful lord. For Tvrtko, it expanded his influence deeper into western Serbian lands, strengthening the foundation of his young kingdom. And for the Balkans, it signaled a rare moment of unity, one that momentarily slowed the region's descent into fragmentation. Yet beneath the surface of cooperation, tensions lingered. Tvrtko's coronation as King of the Serbs implicitly challenged Lazar's own authority over the Serbian legacy. While the two men respected each other's power, their ambitions were not perfectly aligned. Lazar sought to rebuild Serbia with himself as its moral center, while Tvrtko envisioned Bosnia rising as a new regional power, capable of inheriting the mantle of the old Serbian Empire. Even so, both rulers recognized a truth that transcended rivalry. The Ottoman Empire loomed over the Balkans like an approaching storm, and neither Bosnia nor Serbia could stand alone. Their alliance, born of calculation rather than friendship, held firm because the alternative was unthinkable. As the 1380s advanced, the success of their cooperation became increasingly fragile. Ottoman incursions intensified, targets shifted, and the political geography of the Balkans changed with unsettling speed. The momentary stability won by Lazar and Tvrtko was beginning to crumble, and both men sensed that the horizon carried the weight of an approaching reckoning. By the early 1380s, the Balkans had enjoyed only a fragile illusion of calm. Beneath that surface, the Ottoman Empire was gathering strength once more, testing the resilience of its Christian neighbors with waves of small but relentless incursions. These were not full-scale invasions, but calculated disruptions, swift cavalry raids meant to plunder, provoke uncertainty, and map the terrain for future campaigns. Murad understood that instability was often more useful than outright conquest. A kingdom shaken by fear was easier to bend than a kingdom broken by war. In 1380, Ottoman detachments moved with increasing regularity into Serbian and Bulgarian lands. Their goals were simple, yet destructive: burn crops, seize livestock, kill or capture fighting men, and shake the confidence of local rulers. These sudden strikes, carried out by Akunci raiders and supported by scouts, served as both reconnaissance and psychological warfare. For local populations, they became a recurring nightmare that arrived without warning and vanished just as quickly, leaving only ruins and rumors behind. Bulgaria bore the brunt of these early assaults. The regions south of the Balkan Mountains were ravaged repeatedly, weakening an already fractured state. By wearing down Bulgaria first, the Ottomans sought to isolate Serbia and ensure that no coordinated Christian resistance could form. Yet even as Ottoman pressure mounted, the Christian lords occasionally struck back with unexpected resolve. One such moment came in the summer of 1381, at the Battle of Dubrovnica. An Ottoman raiding party pushed deeper than usual into Bulgarian territory and inadvertently crossed into the domain of Prince Lazar. His voivodes reacted swiftly, rallying their forces and inflicting a rare defeat on the Turkish detachment. The victory was small, but it echoed across Serbia as proof that the Ottoman tide was not unstoppable. Lazar's growing authority now extended beyond politics. He had become a military leader capable of defending his lands. But the Ottomans were relentless. In 1383, they turned their attention southward and captured Ceres, one of the most important cities in Macedonia. 2 years later, in 1385, Sofia fell as well. These conquests were not isolated victories, but a tightening noose. Each new Ottoman stronghold served as a stepping stone, allowing Murad's armies to push deeper into the Balkans with increased efficiency. The road to Serbia lay open, and Murad knew it. The storm finally broke in 1386, when a large Ottoman army advanced toward the Serbian heartland. They captured the city of Niš, a vital crossroads linking Serbia with the rest of the Balkans. From there, they marched toward Lazar's capital at Kruševac, threatening the very core of his domain. But Lazar refused to yield. At the Battle of Pločnik, he rallied his forces and struck the Ottomans with unexpected ferocity, inflicting a heavy defeat that forced Murad's troops to retreat, though they kept Niš as their hard-won foothold. This victory emboldened Serbia and bolstered Lazar's reputation as a capable defender. In Bulgaria, Tsar Ivan Shishman was inspired as well. Believing that the Ottoman momentum had been halted, he stopped paying tribute and withdrew his support. But this hope proved tragically short-lived. Murad responded with overwhelming force, invading Bulgaria with a massive army, capturing multiple fortresses and compelling Ivan Shishman back into vassalage. Resistance, once again, had been punished. In 1387, another major blow struck the Christian world. Thessaloniki, the second largest city of Byzantium, fell into Ottoman hands. What had once been a major bastion of Greek influence now became a symbol of Ottoman permanence in the region. The fall of Thessaloniki sent a chilling message to every ruler from Bosnia to Wallachia. The Ottomans were no longer probing but anchoring themselves deep inside the Balkans. By the late 1380s, it was clear that Murad's strategy had shifted. Raids and small incursions had laid the groundwork, but they were no longer enough. Serbia's resilience, Bosnia's defiance, and even the occasional victories of Christian commanders signaled that only a decisive campaign could break the last pockets of resistance. And so, Murad began preparations, not for another raid, but for a war of annihilation. Even as Ottoman pressure mounted across the Balkans, not every Christian realm bowed under its weight. In 1388, Bosnia, led by the ambitious King Tvrtko, showed that the Ottomans could still be bloodied. Tvrtko had watched the encroachment of Murad's armies for years, aware that Bosnia would eventually face the same fate as Bulgaria and the Serbian lands if it did not prepare. And so, when an Ottoman force under the seasoned commander Lala Shahin Pasha advanced toward Bosnian territory, Tvrtko did not hesitate. He entrusted the defense to one of his most capable warriors, Vlatko Vuković. Vuković was a veteran of the Balkan struggles, pragmatic, disciplined, and intimately familiar with Ottoman tactics. Unlike many nobles who treated war as ceremony, he understood the practical realities of fighting an enemy whose strength lay in mobility and relentless pressure. When Shahin Pasha's raiders entered Bosnian lands, Vuković positioned his forces carefully, choosing ground that negated the Turks' advantage in fast-moving cavalry. What followed was one of the few decisive Christian victories of the era. In the clash that ensued, the Bosnians struck with coordinated fury. Their heavy infantry and cavalry pressed the Ottomans into a fight they had not anticipated, a pitched battle against a well-prepared foe rather than a swift raid against unready villages. Shahin Pasha's troops, accustomed to terrorizing fragmented states, found themselves facing a disciplined Bosnian army under a commander who had anticipated their every move. By the time the fighting ended, the Ottoman force was broken, and Shahin Pasha barely escaped with his life. For the Balkans, this victory was more than a military success. It was a rare surge of hope. Messengers carried news of the triumph across the Christian lands, stirring confidence in courts that had grown accustomed to fear. If Bosnia, a kingdom smaller and less fortified than Serbia, could defeat an Ottoman army, then perhaps the tide could be turned. Perhaps the Balkans were not doomed to fall piece by piece into Murad's grasp. From Tvrtko's perspective, the victory also had political value. It demonstrated Bosnia's strength to both allies and rivals. While Tvrtko had long cooperated with Lazar, the balance of power between the two Christian rulers was complex. Bosnia's success at defeating Shahin Pasha elevated Tvrtko's prestige and affirmed his role as a major actor in the coming conflict. It also reminded Serbia, especially the increasingly powerful Lazar, that Bosnia was not merely an auxiliary force, but a kingdom capable of shaping events on its own. But victory, as sweet as it was, carried an undercurrent of danger. For Sultan Murad, the defeat in Bosnia was not simply a setback, it was an insult that demanded retribution. He had relied on raids to weaken Christian defenses, but Bosnia's resistance showed that small detachments were no longer enough. The Balkan lords were adapting, learning, and hardening their resolve. The Battle of Bileća, 1088, thus became a turning point, not because it halted Ottoman expansion, but because it forced Murad to reconsider the scale of his strategy. If the Balkan states could repel limited raids, then only a grand campaign could break them. All signs pointed toward a single conclusion. A confrontation with Lazar's Serbia and Tvrtko's Bosnia was inevitable. As autumn faded into winter, scouts reported increased Ottoman activity along the borders. Muster lists were drawn up in Anatolia and Rumelia. Fortresses were reinforced. Supply caravans moved steadily across imperial roads. Murad was preparing not for another probing raid, but for a decisive blow, one that would bring the entire Balkan resistance to its knees. And deep within his court, As preparations mounted, the Sultan made a solemn decision. He would lead this campaign in person. By the end of the 1380s, tension gripped the Balkans like a coiling spring. The raids, the skirmishes, the shifting alliances, these had all been preludes to a storm that everyone sensed, but no one could yet see. Sultan Murad I, having learned from both his victories and his setbacks, began assembling one of the largest armies the region had ever witnessed. This would not be a punitive expedition or a plundering raid. It would be a reckoning. A campaign designed to crush the last unified resistance in the Central Balkans, the coalition led by Prince Lazar of Serbia. Across the Ottoman Empire, orders were dispatched. From the plains of Anatolia came seasoned cavalry, their armor glinting under the sun as they crossed the straits into Europe. From Rumelia arrived Akuncha raiders, grizzled and eager, followed by disciplined Azeb infantry and companies of skilled archers. Even the elite janissaries, trained from youth for absolute loyalty, marched under Murad's banner. The Sultan's two sons, Yaqub Çelebi and Bayezid, joined him, each commanding a wing of the army, each knowing that this campaign would determine not only the fate of the Balkans, but the future of the dynasty itself. Meanwhile, in Serbia, Prince Lazar received word of Murad's preparations. He understood at once what it meant. The Ottomans were coming not to raid, but to conquer, to decide once and for all whether Serbia would remain a sovereign realm or be subsumed into the expanding empire. Lazar began gathering his forces, summoning lords from across Moravian Serbia, and calling on the obligations of his allies. Messengers rode at full gallop to Bosnia, carrying urgent pleas to King Tvrtko. Despite his concerns on the Dalmatian front, Tvrtko responded, dispatching a contingent of Bosnian knights under Vlatko Vuković, the same commander who had humbled Shahin Pasha the year before. Lazar also turned to his closest and most powerful vassal, Vuk Branković, master of Kosovo. Branković had both the manpower and the strategic position needed for the coming war, and he committed his forces with the understanding that the battle would be fought on lands he governed. Whether driven by loyalty, ambition, or cold pragmatism, his participation strengthened the Serbian coalition at a critical moment. Rumors spread that small contingents of knights from Hungary, Wallachia, Bulgaria, Albania, and Croatia may have joined Lazar's call. Their numbers were small, perhaps symbolic rather than decisive, but their presence revealed the growing anxiety among Christian realms. Even those embroiled in their own struggles sensed that the confrontation at Kosovo would resonate far beyond Serbia's borders. The fate of the region, perhaps even the fate of Europe, seemed to hang in the balance. Still, Lazar faced challenges of his own. His relations with Hungary had been strained by earlier political entanglements, and he could not fully rely on support from King Sigismund. Every alliance had to be measured carefully, every promise weighed against the risk of betrayal. The coalition he gathered was strong, but not unbreakable. For all its valor and spirit, the Christian army remained a mosaic of factions, loyalties, and ambitions, whereas the Ottoman army moved under a single, unified command. As winter thawed into spring, both armies advanced toward an inevitable meeting. Scouts roamed the forests and valleys, gathering intelligence on troop movements. Villagers fled before the oncoming armies, leaving fields empty and roads quiet. The distant echo of marching feet and clattering armor became an omen carried across the wind. The Balkans waited in breathless uncertainty. And somewhere in this landscape, between the mountains, the forests, and the broad expanse of the Kosovo plain, the destinies of princes and sultans, of nations and empires, were converging. A battle was coming that would scar the memory of generations. Both sides sensed it. Both sides prepared for it. And neither side knew that history would remember Kosovo not merely as a battlefield, but as a legend. On the morning of June 15, 1389, two armies faced each other across the wide, wind-swept expanse of the Kosovo plain. Mist still clung to the low ground, drifting like pale veils around standards, lances, and the dark silhouettes of waiting soldiers. For a moment, brief, almost fragile, there was a silence that belied the catastrophe about to unfold. The fate of states, dynasties, and generations rested on a field where thousands now waited for a signal to kill or die. Sultan Murad arranged his army with the precision of a man who had spent decades studying the art of war. At the front, he placed lines of archers, experienced, disciplined, accustomed to softening enemy ranks with volleys of arrows before the clash of steel. Behind them stood the Azeb infantry, lighter troops trained to absorb the first impact of a charge and hold the line long enough for heavier forces to strike. To the rear were the wings of the Ottoman cavalry, the swift Akunja, masters of harassment, and the Sipahi, heavy cavalry drawn from the empire's feudal elite. These men were the backbone of Murad's European campaigns, fierce and loyal. Murad's sons commanded the flanks. Jakub Čelebi held the left, positioned opposite Vuk Branković's Serbian right wing, where some of the best armored cavalry in the Balkans waited. Bayezid, known for his speed and decisiveness, controlled the right flank. The Sultan himself remained in the center, surrounded by a detachment of janissaries, the empire's most disciplined soldiers, tasked with guarding both Murad and the heart of the Ottoman line. It was a formation designed not simply to resist, but to absorb a blow and counter with devastating precision. Murad expected a Serbian charge, and he prepared accordingly. Across the plain, the Christian coalition arranged itself in a formation reflecting both tradition and necessity. Serbian heavy cavalry, the pride of Lazar's army, stood at the front, armored knights mounted on powerful war horses bred for impact. These riders represented the military elite of the Balkans, and their charge, if coordinated properly, was capable of shattering enemy lines and demoralizing opponents before they could regroup. Lighter cavalry units filled the gaps at the edges, ready to exploit breakthroughs or reinforce weakened positions. Behind them gathered the infantry, men armed with spears, axes, shields, and an unspoken understanding that the coming battle would not be one of maneuver, but of endurance. Prince Lazar commanded the center, surrounded by his nobles and closest retainers. To his left stood Vlatko Vuković with the Bosnian contingent, experienced, disciplined, confident after their victory the previous year. To Lazar's right was Vuk Branković, whose control over Kosovo made him not only a key ally, but a man fighting for the lands beneath his feet. Estimating the size of both armies has long challenged historians. Medieval chroniclers often inflated or minimized numbers for political or emotional effect, leaving modern scholars to interpret incomplete evidence. Yet most agree on one reality. The Ottomans likely outnumbered the Serb-led coalition, fielding perhaps 30,000 men to Lazar's 20,000. Their numerical advantage was particularly strong in infantry, while the Serbs held superiority in heavy cavalry. But battles are not decided by numbers alone. They are decided by timing, cohesion, and resolve. Lazar's strategy hinged on a decisive strike. He planned for his heavy cavalry to break the Ottoman formation in its early stages, sowing enough panic and disruption to force a retreat. The psychological shock of armored knights charging at full speed, shields lowered, lances glinting, was a weapon in itself. But Murad, anticipating this, deliberately structured his army to absorb the blow. Rows of sharpened stakes had been placed to slow the cavalry's advance, and archers were poised to provoke the charge prematurely. The air grew tense as both armies finalized their preparations. Across the field, standards fluttered, Christian crosses facing the crescent banners of the Ottoman Sultanate. Men whispered prayers to God, to Christ, to saints, to ancestors. Others remained silent, gripping their weapons with the grim resolve of soldiers who understood that this day might be their last. Then, as the sun climbed higher, a single thunderous sound broke the quiet. The first Ottoman artillery shots, hurling heavy projectiles that crashed into the ground far short of their targets. The aim was poor, but the message was unmistakable. The battle for Kosovo had begun. The first Ottoman artillery shots had done little physical damage, yet their thunder rolled across the plain like an omen. Dust rose where the projectiles struck empty ground, and for a heartbeat the battlefield seemed suspended between silence and chaos. Then the archers stepped forward. With a practiced rhythm, thousands of bowstrings tightened and released, sending volleys of arrows arcing high into the morning sky. Their shadows flickered across the Serbian cavalry, falling like a whisper of the violence to come. The arrows inflicted little harm on the heavily armored knights, but they achieved their true purpose: agitation. Horses tossed their heads, snorting under the tapping of shafts against metal. Men tightened their grips on reins and lances, their impatience mounting with each passing second. Murad had intended this moment: disrupt the enemy, provoke them, draw them into a charge before they could fully coordinate. And across the field, Prince Lazar recognized the intent, but he also knew the power of his cavalry depended on momentum, not restraint. Lazar raised his arm. For a moment, all eyes fixed on him. Serbian nobles, Bosnian captains, Kosovar knights whose families had lived on this land for generations. Then his hand dropped. The order was given, and the plain erupted. The Serbian heavy cavalry surged forward with a force that seemed to shake the earth itself. Thousands of hooves hammered the soil, sending vibrations coursing through the ground like the rumble of a distant storm. Sunlight flashed off polished helmets and steel breastplates. Lances lowered in unison, forming a deadly row of sharpened points aimed directly at the Ottoman center. The charge was not merely a tactic. It was a declaration of defiance, a statement that Serbia and Bosnia would not go quietly into vassalage. The Ottomans braced for impact. Arrows continued to rain down, but the advancing cavalry sliced through them without faltering. Lines of sharpened stakes slowed the first wave, breaking the perfect symmetry of the charge, but not its fury. When the collision came, it was immense. Serbian knights crashed into Azeb infantry with a force that split shields and shattered bones. The Ottoman front line buckled, and for a moment the disciplined ranks of Murad's army wavered under the sheer weight of the assault. At the center, Lazar fought at the head of his cavalry, his presence galvanizing the men around him. To the left, Bosnian commander Vlatko Vuković pressed hard into the Ottoman right wing, his troops driving deep into enemy lines. But it was on the Serbian right, under Vuk Branković, that the most dramatic success unfolded. Branković's armored riders struck Jakub Čelebi's wing with devastating intensity, pushing the Ottomans back step by step until their line began to bend and fracture. For the first time that day, doubt flickered through the Ottoman formation. As Branković's knights drove forward, they broke through into the Ottoman camp itself, an extraordinary achievement on any battlefield. Tents collapsed under the weight of the attack. Camels panicked and scattered. For a brief, electrifying moment, it seemed that the Serbian right wing might collapse not just the flank, but the very heart of Murad's army. Chroniclers later wrote that dust rose like smoke over the plain, obscuring the sun, as the Serbian cavalry cut their way deeper into enemy ground. The Serbian center, too, made progress, pushing the Ottomans back and forcing Murad's forces to fight defensively. Everywhere along the line, steel clashed against steel, arrows hissed past helmets, and the cries of the wounded blended into a single, harrowing echo. The opening phase of the battle had become a test of resolve, a struggle between the Ottoman capacity to absorb shock and the Serbian determination to break through before momentum faded. Yet beneath the chaos, Murad's strategy still lingered like a hidden blade. He had expected to suffer in the first phase. He had prepared to yield ground, and he had positioned his commanders to strike when the time came. The Serbian charge had been brilliant, but no cavalry, no matter how fierce, could sustain such momentum forever. Soon, the counterstroke would come, and when it did, the tide of the battle would turn. For a fleeting moment, the thunderous Serbian charge seemed capable of tipping the entire course of the battle. Branković's right wing smashed through Jakub Čelebi's lines with such ferocity that the Ottoman flank bent inward like a shield under too much pressure. Dust swirled around the warhorses as their hooves tore through the ground, and the Ottoman infantry, lightly armored and unprepared for the full force of Balkan heavy cavalry, scrambled to hold their positions. In the heart of the chaos, Branković's riders pushed deeper, cutting a path toward the very center of the Ottoman camp. It was here that legend and history begin to blur. Several sources, including letters written immediately after the battle, claim that a group of Serbian knights managed to hack their way through the collapsing left wing and into the inner ring of Murad's encampment. The tents stood surrounded by panicked camels, imperial guards struggling to form a defensive line. In the storm of steel and shouts, one knight, whose name remains uncertain, allegedly struck down Sultan Murad. Some accounts say he broke through on horseback, others that he slipped into the camp feigning death and attacked when the Sultan passed nearby. The truth is lost in the dust of Kosovo. But what is clear is that Murad did not survive the day. The death of a sultan on the battlefield should have shattered the Ottoman army. Yet even amid the rising confusion, the chain of command did not collapse entirely. Elsewhere on the field, the beleaguered Ottoman left received crucial reinforcements. Infantry reserves stabilized the line just long enough to halt Branković's advance. The momentary breach closed like a wound, and the Serbs found themselves pressed back by sheer numbers and relentless counterattacks. On the Ottoman right, Bayezid, already known for his speed and ruthlessness, saw the danger unfolding. Without hesitation, he rallied his Sipahi cavalry and launched a fierce counteroffensive against the Bosnian left wing. Vlatko Vuković fought bravely, but his men, exhausted from the earlier push, struggled to withstand the renewed pressure. Step by step, the Bosnian line began to bend, then break, and finally withdraw. Vuković managed to preserve a portion of his forces, but the cohesion of the Christian coalition had begun to unravel. With the Bosnian left wing collapsing, the Serbian center under Lazar suddenly stood exposed. Exhausted by prolonged combat, their horses spent, their infantry thinning, Lazar's forces braced themselves as Bayezid redirected his full might against them. What had begun as a promising advance now teetered on the edge of disaster. Realizing the battle was slipping beyond salvation, Vuk Branković made a fateful decision. Seeing that the Serbian left had fled and that the Ottomans were regaining control of the field, he began an organized withdrawal. To some chroniclers, this was a strategic necessity, saving the only intact Serbian contingent from annihilation. To others, whispered through centuries of folklore, it was betrayal. But in the cold logic of war, Branković likely saw what any commander in his position would. The center could not hold. Prince Lazar, unable or unwilling to retreat, remained in the thick of the fighting. Accounts vary as to how he met his end. Some say he fell in battle surrounded by his guards. Others claim he was captured, brought before Bayezid, and executed. Both versions reflect the same truth. Lazar fought until escape was no longer possible. His death marked the symbolic breaking point of the Serbian army. Meanwhile, on the Ottoman side, another drama unfolded. With Murad dead, Bayezid swiftly secured his succession. His brother Yakub, unaware of the Sultan's demise, continued fighting on the left wing. To prevent any challenge to the throne, Bayezid ordered him killed, an act both ruthless and necessary according to Ottoman dynastic practice. With both commanders' fates sealed in blood, authority consolidated under Bayezid at the very moment the battle drew to its close. By sunset, the field of Kosovo was a patchwork of broken lances, fallen banners, and thousands of bodies. The dust settled slowly, revealing the cost of a battle where both kingdoms had lost their rulers. Victory, if it could be called that, belonged to whichever side could still stand. And as night descended, it was the Ottomans, bloodied, leaderless for a moment, yet unbroken, who remained on the field. When the echoes of battle finally faded, the Kosovo plain lay silent, a vast graveyard of shattered armor, splintered shields, and the bodies of men who had marched there with hopes of glory, vengeance, or survival. The evening wind carried the smell of dust and blood across the emptying field. It was a landscape scarred not only by war, but by the uncertainty that followed. 2 rulers were dead, 2 armies decimated, and an entire region found itself suspended between triumph and despair. The death of Sultan Murad, whether in the heat of combat or in the chaotic aftermath, sent ripples through the Ottoman ranks. For a brief moment, the army risked fracturing beneath the weight of panic and grief. Yet Bayezid moved swiftly, consolidating command with a decisiveness that would define his rule. Any potential rival, including his brother Yakub, was eliminated before a challenge could emerge. With the throne secured, Bayezid's first instinct was not further conquest, but stabilization. The Ottoman army withdrew from the battlefield, not in defeat, but in purposeful retreat, seeking to regroup and secure the empire after losing its sovereign. In Christian courts across Europe, however, the story was far different. News traveled quickly, often faster than truth. Letters from King Tvrtko of Bosnia, written mere days after the battle, celebrated the death of the Sultan and framed the event as a victory for Christendom. Florence, Venice, and other Italian states echoed this narrative, praising the bravery of the Balkan soldiers who had struck down the feared Ottoman ruler. In these accounts, Kosovo became not a shattered battlefield, but a triumph carved out by knights who had sacrificed themselves to halt an imperial tide. Yet for Moravian Serbia, the reality was grim. Prince Lazar, dead on the field or executed shortly after, left behind a realm without its leader. Power fell into the hands of his widow, Princess Maritsa, who now governed on behalf of their young son, Sultan Lazarević. But Serbia's military strength had been broken. Its armies were gone, its noble houses shattered, and its defenses weakened. The kingdom that had marched with such resolve toward Kosovo returned with only fragments of its former might, and danger lurked from every direction. Before the winter of 1389 had fully set in, Hungary invaded from the north, striking deep into Serbian lands while the country reeled from its losses. Cities were besieged, villages burned, and the fragile political order threatened to collapse. Maritsa, facing destruction from one side and Ottoman resurgence from the other, made a choice that would define the next century of Serbian history. She accepted Ottoman suzerainty, pledging loyalty to Bayezid and sending her youngest daughter to his court as a symbol of peace. What began at Kosovo ended with Serbia entering the Ottoman sphere, not through conquest, but through necessity. Meanwhile, Vuk Branković, the only Serbian lord whose forces had partially survived, continued resisting the Ottomans for years, controlling key territories and maintaining a degree of independence. Yet even he could not reverse the tide that had begun at Kosovo. The fragmented remnants of Serbian power simply lacked the unity and strength to confront the empire rising to the south. Historians continue to debate who won the Battle of Kosovo. The ambiguity of its outcome is rooted in the rare double tragedy that befell both sides, the death of their rulers. Serbia halted the Ottoman advance for a moment, and the death of Murad was celebrated across Europe. Yet, on the battlefield itself, it was the Ottomans who held their ground, and it was Serbia that suffered the deeper political and military collapse. The Ottoman war machine would resume its campaigns within a year, stronger under Bayezid, while Serbia would spend the next century oscillating between resistance, vassalage, and survival. But beyond strategy and politics, Kosovo became something else, an enduring symbol. For Serbs, it embodied sacrifice, heroism, and the tragic beauty of a people who fought for their land against overwhelming odds. For the Ottomans, it marked the resilience of an empire capable of weathering even the death of its sultan without breaking. And for the Balkans as a whole, it stood as a reminder of how a single battle could reshape destinies, redraw alliances, and ignite legends that would echo for centuries. In the months following the Battle of Kosovo, the smoke of war faded from the plain, but its echoes continued to reverberate across the Balkans. The immediate aftermath left a fractured landscape, Serbia weakened and vulnerable, Bosnia proud but cautious, and the Ottoman Empire bruised yet unbroken. What had happened on that June day was not the decisive victory either side had hoped for. Instead, it became a moment suspended in history, interpreted differently by every nation that felt its tremors. For the Ottomans, Kosovo was a stepping stone, not a setback. Bayezid, newly crowned amid the tragedy of his father's death, wasted little time reasserting his authority. He tightened control over the empire's European territories, reinforcing fortresses and reorganizing his armies. Within a year of Murad's death, Ottoman campaigns resumed with renewed momentum. The brief disruption caused by Kosovo only served to highlight the empire's remarkable resilience. Despite losing a sultan on the field, the Ottomans continued their expansion, aiding their Serbian vassals in disputes with Hungary and gradually tightening their influence throughout the region. For Moravian Serbia, the picture was far darker. The death of Prince Lazar left a kingdom without its central figure, and Princess Maritsa's acceptance of Ottoman suzerainty marked the beginning of a long, complex relationship with the empire. Lazar's son, Sultan Lazarević, would grow into a renowned military leader and statesman, eventually earning the title of despot, and forging a remarkable but fragile balance between East and West. Yet the political autonomy Serbia managed to maintain in the late 14th and early 15th centuries came at a cost. Vassalage, tribute, and military service to the very empire that had shattered its armies on the Kosovo plain. Meanwhile, Vuk Branković's refusal to bow to Ottoman authority became both legend and burden. His territories, though spared the devastation faced by Lazar's central lands, were increasingly isolated. For a time, he stood as the last major Serbian noble resisting the Sultan, but even his persistence could not reverse the strategic realities shaped at Kosovo. His defiance, though celebrated in folk memory, eventually succumbed to the empire's expanding reach. Among Christian realms further west, Kosovo entered the chronicles as a triumph, proof that the Ottomans could bleed, that Christian bravery could strike down even a sultan. But for those who lived in the shadow of the empire, the meaning of the battle became more complex. It was both a symbol of resistance and a reminder of vulnerability, a rallying cry and a lament. The ambiguity, two rulers dead, two armies broken, neither side able to claim absolute victory, allowed Kosovo to become something larger than a military engagement. It became a canvas onto which generations projected fear, pride, and identity. In Serbia, Kosovo Polje transformed into sacred ground. Songs, epics, and oral traditions elevated the fallen knights into martyrs, and Prince Lazar into a saintly figure who had chosen a heavenly kingdom over an earthly one. Miloš Obilić, whether historical or mythic, emerged as the archetype of the hero who sacrifices everything to strike at tyranny. These stories, shaped by centuries of retelling, hardened the battle into a cornerstone of national memory. An event that defined what it meant to endure, to resist, to remember. For the Ottomans, Kosovo validated their long-term strategy. By defeating Lazar's coalition, even at immense cost, they dismantled the strongest Christian alliance in the Central Balkans. With the road cleared, the empire extended its reach deeper into Europe in the decades that followed. Cities fell, alliances shifted, and by the mid-15th century, Constantinople itself would fall, an event unthinkable without the earlier neutralization of Balkan resistance. Kosovo, therefore, was not the climax of Ottoman expansion, but a key chapter in its relentless march. And yet, despite its strategic importance, Kosovo's true legacy lies not in borders or treaties, but in memory. Few battles in medieval Europe produced so many conflicting narratives, each shaped by grief, pride, or political need. Historians debate who won, nations debate what it meant. The truth is that Kosovo exists in two realms, one of historical fact, the other of collective memory. In one, it was a brutal, indecisive battle with devastating losses on both sides. In the other, it became myth, a story of sacrifice and survival that outlived the empires that once fought upon that field. Today, Kosovo remains a symbol layered with centuries of meaning. It stands as a reminder of the fragility of nations, the cost of ambition, and the enduring power of stories. For the Balkan peoples, it became an anchor in turbulent centuries. For the Ottomans, a testament to imperial tenacity. And for the world that looks back upon it, Kosovo is a window into the past, revealing how wars are not only fought with swords and arrows, but with memory itself.